Welcome to Lead for Good, a podcast for nonprofit leaders of all titles and all experience levels. This is a show where the audience will meet and get to know top nonprofit leaders. Together, we will take a deep dive into nonprofit leadership, endeavoring to uncover and unpack the most important characteristics, traits, strategies, and actions of successful nonprofit leaders. Through this journey together, we desire to help you, the nonprofit leader, grow your knowledge and capabilities to lead for good. We want you to achieve your full potential as leaders in the sector. So, welcome to the conversation. We're glad you joined us today. Without further delay, let's join our host, Chris Looney, as he interviews yet another extraordinary leader who is truly leading for good. Enjoy the show.
Welcome, everybody, to Lead for Good, the podcast where we explore leadership that drives meaningful impact in the nonprofit sector and beyond. Today's conversation is an important one. We're talking about what it really means to lead people when the work carries emotional weight and how to lead with empathy without burning out in the process. And we want to welcome our guest today, Ronnetta Johnson. We're glad to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be with you.
Yeah, Ronnetta. Well, we're excited to learn from you and have a deeper understanding of sort of our topic for today. But before we jump into all of that, it's important that we kind of get to know you a little bit better. And I'd love for you to take us back to the beginning and share a little bit about your leadership journey. How did that unfold, and what were some of the critical moments for you in that journey to the leader you are today?
Well, I think that I had the fortune of starting when I was pretty young. So I started in junior high, basically, with church group leadership and then different music groups and things at school. And so that got me started, and I was able to really witness what other people were doing. So that was a helpful start. After college, I tried retail management for a bit, but it didn't take long to realize I didn't really care about retail management, and it was not my path forward. So then I moved on to working in a hospital in the volunteer program. And then we just decided on a lark to move to California. So we moved to California, and I spent 6 years as a program director for an organization called the Starlight Foundation, which granted wishes to seriously ill children. And so did that, and then moved into what is now Waymakers. And when I moved to Waymakers, I expected that I would stick to my usual pattern, which would be, 6 years or something like that. And 3 decades later, I'm still here. So I was able to have some different experiences, and within the organization, I was a program director. I did the HR director for 3 years. And then moved back to the victim assistance programs as a director. And then I've been the CEO for the past 11 years. So that's kind of my path and journey as far as leadership is concerned.
Yeah, it's amazing and it's wonderful. I love it. I love individuals that spend real time with an organization and find real success. But I'm sure there were lots of people that helped you along the way in the form of mentorship. And I just wanted to know who some of those people might have been. You don't have to name names, but who kind of were they and how did they help you?
Yeah. So obviously the first ones were my parents. They were both leaders in the community, and really I was able to witness them, but more importantly, they really encouraged me. And so they were always helping me to experience new things and try new things, but they had a lot of confidence in me. And so that was a great way to start. Um, and then when I was at the Starlight Foundation, I had a board member who really became a pivotal mentor for me. He was a generous coach, and he really helped me navigate this world of a growing nonprofit that was in an environment that was entirely different from anything that I had ever experienced. Starlight was very based in the entertainment industry. They had a lot of entertainment folks. And so that was a cultural shift and change too. Um, and I think I've learned both good and things I don't want to do from all of the leaders that I've worked with. But I think over the past few years, my biggest learning has come from the people in the nonprofit environment, learning colleagues across the sector, the teams that I've led. I learn a lot from my teams, and I've been part of leadership cohorts and trainings. So all of those things I think have an impact. And then over the past few years, I've also had the privilege of coaching emerging leaders and CEOs.
Wow.
And that process has been a great learning experience for me, as well as for hopefully for those that I've been coaching as we've gone through that process. I think if we do it right, leadership is a progressive process, and you never really stop learning, and you never stop looking to those around you to help support and guide your leadership journey.
Amen to that. Yeah, 100%. And where you are today, what are you currently thinking about in terms of leadership? What's important to you in your own leadership, or a philosophy that you might carry with you about leadership?
Well, I got a master's in organizational leadership.
Okay.
And I got the master's through Gonzaga University. And part of what they have is a servant leadership um, certificate program as part of their
Amazing.
master's program. And so I think my leadership style is really a blend of that servant leadership perspective and a democratic approach. So kind of merging those two things.
Yeah,
I think servant leadership focuses on the fact that your first responsibility is to the people that you're serving, both as your employees and obviously as your clients, and um, and putting those factors before what might be your personal preferences in certain circumstances. The democratic side, I think, keeps you open to other opinions, make sure that you are not just going forward with your first inclination, which is a challenge for me sometimes because I tend
of
to be
course.
pretty instinctual in my decision-making processes. So kind of backing up and making sure that the folks around me have a voice, and oftentimes they're the ones that are doing the direct service work anyway, so I don't want to impinge on that. So I think those two styles also help me lean into what I really care about, which is developing team members. And so really developing our staff, helping people we have a good tradition of people within the organization kind of moving up in the organization and taking on additional responsibilities. And so that's important to me. And I think that having an inclusive culture where everyone feels that empowerment to lead, no matter what position they're holding, is what makes the agency a really viable and vital organization.
Well said. Yeah, wonderful. Um, well, I think we've covered some great ground in terms of your leadership journey, and I wanted to leave plenty of time for our conversation around our topic today. So let's move into something that I know is very real for many leaders, especially in the nonprofit space. And the work we do is meaningful, but it often carries a significant emotional weight. And what I'd like to first ask is when you think about teams doing emotionally heavy work, what makes leading in that environment different from more traditional leadership contexts?
Well, I think the first thing is we're not dealing with widgets. And we're not, as a leader, you're not just assigning out management tasks or things that have to be done. It's you're dealing with people in crisis, and that frequently takes a toll on your teams. And so it requires that as a leader, you have more focus on the psychological safety for your staff,
Hmm.
and you need systems in place to really provide the support that's needed for those circumstances. So your staff members need to be able to be supported in building the skills that they need to think well under pressure, to be able to handle the emotional toll of the work that they're doing, because we're definitely working with some really difficult kinds of situations. Um, and at the same time, uh, two other factors come into it. First of all, you need to watch your own emotional um, balance, so to speak, because if you're falling apart, you can't help your team members.
Very good.
And you can't just constantly absorb all of the emotional weight of everything that your organization is doing. So you have to find balance in that. And you still have to create expectations. You still have to do the work of the organization. So it's, balancing the care for your team members with the work that has to be done to achieve the mission of the organization.
Well, what are some signs that a team or an individual is carrying too much emotional weight?
So usually it's behavioral shifts. So noticing things in your team members that isn't their normal practice or behavior. So if somebody's suddenly always exhausted, really irritable, if
Mhm.
they've withdrawn, uh, that's something that you really need to pay attention to. You want to, for a team, you might see that people are becoming overly reactive to each other, or they may be struggling to make decisions. They may have lost their creativity levels. And all of these things are changes in behavior that you're looking for. So it's important, if you can, to notice and acknowledge small shifts early on, because you
Okay.
don't want to just let it keep building and building until then you have a crisis. And so a lot of times, if you can just say, hey, I've noticed you're not quite yourself today. Can you tell me what's going on? That can frequently intervene at a place where it's easy to fix it, as opposed to someone who's just gotten mired down in emotional um, concerns and problems that then takes a deeper intervention to kind of correct course on.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. How do you create that space for a team or individual to process what they're experiencing without it impacting performance in a negative way?
Well, I think at first, clearly we have regular debriefing opportunities. So we have, for example, we have a crisis response team, and so in the aftermath of a response to a mass victimization or some other large event, we always do formal debriefing sessions.
Okay.
It's mandatory, and it's carried out in a very formal way. With other situations, it could be a check-in meeting. It's just paying attention to the person as well as whatever the work is that needs to be happening. We really talk openly about the emotional nature of the work and resources that are available to process their feelings, whether it's their supervisors or it's our employee assistance program. Those kinds of resources are available. It's also important that I start this from the initial hiring process. So we acknowledge in the hiring process that the work is difficult. We acknowledge that as part of our processes, we expect people to debrief, to share what they are experiencing. So we normalize it from the beginning so that people don't feel like, well, I have to come in and I have to suck it up because this is the work and that's just how it is. So we want people to feel like that is a normal part of the process of doing this kind of work.
Yeah, and you have a very unique opportunity to be a support structure. And I know other leaders out there probably don't think of themselves as being support in a way. And so this might be a new perspective for leaders to understand about their role. And so I'm just kind of wondering, as you would describe it, what healthy support looks like from a leader in these environments, whether they're an organization that is dealing with some very, heavy issues, or whether it's an organization that still has serious and impactful work, but might not deal with trauma per se.
And I think it's true for leaders across the board because we live in challenging times, and all of us have things that happen at one time or another that can impact what's happening. So the first thing is really listening. We want to make sure that we're giving people the space to talk without jumping in and trying to problem solve or fixing the situation or rushing to a solution. And that's hard for us frequently, especially as leaders. We want to go in and fix the problem and help people. And sometimes people just need to be heard. And so that's the starting place. From there, I think we move into asking what support would be most helpful. Again, helping them to tell us what would be beneficial as opposed to our telling them what we're going to do for them, because it's not going to be the same for every person. And so you need to be sensitive to the uniqueness of the individual that's sitting in front of you. So it could be, sometimes it's practical, like adjusting a workload or pairing them with another team member. Other times it might be validation or giving them suggestions or options. It's important that they understand that they're part of a team and they don't have to carry a load all by themselves. And I think we want to make sure that we're talking about how we can support their emotional needs, but they also how they can fulfill their job responsibilities at the same time. So I think it's important to not push away those responsibilities as unimportant, because they are important. And I think our team members get a lot of validation and support from the work that they do. So it's important to keep those things in balance. And the final thing for leaders, I think, is that you have to model what you're trying to teach your team. And sometimes I'm better at that than other times. But you want to model good boundaries. You want to make sure that they understand that it's okay to take a pause sometimes, to ask questions, to ask for help, to move through that process. But you have to model that as the leader, because otherwise it won't. Um, they're going to pay attention to what you're doing, not necessarily what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, so good. And how do you manage the balance between accountability and compassion? When someone is struggling, it's got to be a struggle or a difficult thing. Do you have any tips?
I think it's going through what we just talked about. You listen to them, you make sure that they feel like they've been heard. Um, and then you circle back to the impact that their situation is having on their ability to do the work
Yeah,
and what kinds of supports they need. It's important for it to be a collaborative process. The You want compassion to guide the conversation, but you also need to not let go of accountability. You need them to still understand that you have expectations for them. And sometimes, if it's bad enough, then it may be something where they have to step away for a while. But if
right.
they're going to be in the job, then they have responsibilities that they have to carry out. So we have to figure out how we can support them so that they can do that job. And they're all in these positions because they have those skills and abilities. And so we want to
Mhm.
make sure that they are able to fulfill those things. I think leadership isn't a choice between um, compassion and accountability. I think we honor the weight of the work, but we still have to maintain clarity of the about performance and what the expectations are.
That is one of those goosebump moments that I was talking about. The fact that you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. So thank you for sharing that. So important and such good guidance for our leaders out there. Um, and this is probably connected to the same advice that you've given already, but looking at practices, rhythms, suggestions of things that you've done to help your team stay grounded and resilient. What do you share? What do you do? How do you practice that?
I think it comes down to intentionality, because it's too easy for all of us to just get so tied up in the work itself that we don't take the time to connect and check in. And so I think having those regular check-ins where you're not just focused on the tasks that need to be done, but you're focused on the person and how they're doing. That's the first check-in, and then you can go on to the tasks and all of those kinds of things. Um, and I think that it's also making sure that we have a practice of pausing after things have been really difficult. We're dealing with people in some of the most challenging and traumatic points in their lives. As we talk about it, it's a lot of worst days of their lives that we come in right after. And so our teams need to take pauses after they've been dealing with those individuals. Um, it's also important to celebrate small and big wins. It's acknowledging when something was tough instead of just kind of trying to push through it. And that's something that I think a lot of nonprofit leaders and team members feel like we want to just push through and keep going regardless. Um, so we conduct those debriefs after intense things. We create space for the teams and just making sure that we're connecting people and that they know that they have the support around them, whether it's from their supervisors or from their team members or whoever it is, that they have that. And I think the building resilience is, you can't do it in like a big dramatic gesture. It has to be built in small, consistent practices that help the team, to stay connected, feel supported, and grounded. And those are just those daily practices that we have to carry out to do that.
That's great. We're going to pivot a little bit, but it's still connected deeply to the conversation we've been having, and that's leading with empathy. Um, and leading with empathy without the burnout that might come. And we're talking about sustainability, boundaries, leadership, discipline, all of these amazing uh, elements to leadership. And so let's start with the fact that empathy is, of course, essential in leadership, but it can also be very draining.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess the question is, how do you personally define healthy empathy as a leader?
Connecting to the person, but not taking on their emotional load.
Hmm.
And that honestly takes time and maybe age, and it's something that you have to practice because
Good.
it's not always something that's um, innate. And I don't know that there are specific tools that you can do, but I think it's um, being fully present with someone's experience and trying to understand their feelings and how they're experiencing that situation without absorbing it as your experience.
Hmm.
So I think it requires that you're connected, that you're listening, and you're responsive, but it's their experience, and you're not kind of taking on that additional load as well.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask the question, where do you see leaders most often getting this wrong? But I think you just kind of explained it.
Yeah,
It's
I think that's true.
making it their own issue.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think sometimes they feel like if they um, are holding people accountable or they're trying to have their own personal a bit of distance, that means that they're uh, lacking compassion, and that's not it at all. And I think that sometimes, again, going back to kind of leaping in. So I think sometimes when you have a staff person who's really holding a lot, leaders will try and take over their responsibilities or lower standards to protect the staff member, and that's not a healthy process, because basically what you're telling the staff person when you do that is, well, I don't think you can really handle this. So let me take that away from you.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that that leads to that whole thing about kind of trying to fix everything or being available 24/7, or, and that's not really healthy empathy. That is a sure path to burnout. And
Hmm.
I think that those are the things where when we try and take on more than we should as leaders, that's what can get us into some challenging situations.
Yeah, yeah. Is it necessary to create boundaries that allow you to care deeply without becoming depleted, or how do you see that?
Something that I've tried to learn through some leadership experiences, and it can be difficult for young leaders. I think you can support and guide and help provide resources. I think those are um, the things that you should be doing as a leader, um, but not taking on, it's all about setting boundaries for your emotional well-being. So you need to be taking care of yourself. You need to be doing that. It can be sometimes as simple as just going away from the office and taking a walk, or doing some other kind of resetting activity. But I think that those things are important. And it's also important for leaders to really disengage at certain times. So if leaders, I think especially in nonprofits, tend to take vacations, but they're checking their emails, they're checking their text messages, so they're not disengaging, and that's not healthy for them. And so that's really something that I've tried to be more intentional about over the past few years. My team always knows that if something really critical comes up, they can text me or call me, but I'm not going to look at my email. Because anytime you do that, you're going to get stirred up about whatever's going on.
Of course.
So, I think those are the places where leaders really need to set boundaries and allow your team members to set those same kind of boundaries as well.
Yeah, that's very good.
I had just a funny little side story.
Sure.
I had one of my first supervisors called me about something really silly while I was in the hospital having my appendix out. And so, that was a lesson learned early on, that, you want to set those boundaries.
Yeah, that's funny because the one I have is that my wife loves to share the fact that I was texting with my supervisor moments before our first son was born. And
Yes.
in the delivery room, of course, and then it didn't take me more than a couple of hours to get right back to texting and calling, and so shame on me. I'm learning, but it is hard for us to create those boundaries, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's easy to think, well, that's just the way I operate, right? But it's deeper than that, because it's the way that you're perceived by others. It's the way that others think they have to behave around you, and it could create some real barriers or challenges in the relationship and the trust and everything else, right?
And I think that's one thing that is really important for leaders to remember and recognize, is that your team members really do pay attention to what you're doing, and they really are going to respond in their work in the way that they're seeing you and what they think the expectations are. Because even if you're saying, no, I only want you to work from 8 to 5 or whatever, but if you're working 19-hour days, then they're going to think, really, I should be doing that, because that's what the expectation is.
I get that. Have you uncovered warning signs that you're approaching burnout? Like for you personally, are there warning signs that you think might exist for other people too? Like, obviously.
Absolutely. For me, I'm typically a pretty even-keeled person.
Yep.
And so when I start feeling reactionary or a little bit grumpy, or some of those things, those are times when
Short-tempered.
I'm like, oh yeah, I need to step away for a bit and figure out kind of what's going on. And I think that's going to vary for each person. And that's why it's important to not only know your own warning signs, but also know kind of the warning signs of your team members, because they're not going to be the same for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, so what have you learned in terms of habits or disciplines that have helped you sustain your energy and leadership over time?
I think the most important thing is really focusing on gratitude, because it's
Okay.
easy to get um, stuck in all the difficult things that are happening and the challenges for both your team members and for yourself. And we are, hopefully, there's always something that we can also be grateful for. And so, kind of doing a reset with gratitude. I think there are also different things that people do. I'm a morning person, and so I value that time before I go to work to kind of reflect and read and kind of get started. And I have better days if I do that than if I don't.
Mhm.
And I think connecting for me, it's also connecting with people in my life that make me laugh and help me to find joy and sometimes tell me that I'm, acting like a crazy person. So, those kinds of things. I think that's again going to be different for every person, but I think it's important to figure out the things that bring you joy, the things that calm you down, the things that help you to feel focused, so that you can move into this work.
Yeah, lovely. That's great. Have you ever needed to hit the reset button when you've had a particularly heavy season? Is that a thing? Can you do that?
You can. You have to be deliberate about it. Most recently, we've started taking some fairly lengthy trips, and and but we also enjoy road trips, and so I think that's how I reset because then I have time to actually be away for a bit. Um, and so I think that's something that I do. And we've been trying to do that on a yearly basis now. And so that helps. I think that it really, again, all of these things are things that people need to be intentional about. So if you know what helps you rejuvenate, then that's where you need to make time for that. And too often we will let things go by and um, we won't spend the time doing those kinds of things because we get too wrapped up in other things. And that's especially important when you've just been through a really difficult time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that aren't honest with their emotional distress. There's also this idea, well, if I just put my head down, plow through it, I need to make it through the season, and everything will be better on the back end if you haven't addressed it, which we know is like sweeping things under the rug, right? It's still there. It's
Yeah,
just hidden a little bit, waiting to come out. And we would always talk to people about taking time before you respond to a particularly difficult email or something. Like
right,
don't immediately respond with an email back to something that gets you agitated. Let it sit with you or think
right.
about it, bring the emotional temperature down. And yet, when it becomes something even more potentially traumatic, there's not this same approach.
I think that's true. And I think part of the reason for that is that if we're not doing regular check-ins and kind of gauging the temperature, it's going to creep up on us. And we won't recognize it until we have kind of tipped over the edge.
Well, what advice would you give to a leader who feels like they're constantly pouring out, but not being refilled?
We're responsible for our own well-being.
Okay.
So we can't rely on somebody else to fix it for us. And especially for leaders in nonprofits, there's always going to be something. There will always be something that will be happening and that will be difficult and challenging. And so it's really easy for us to deplete ourselves in that process. And so nobody's going to rescue us from that. We hopefully have good support systems that will help to tell us hard truths or tell us when we need to step away. But we have to determine what actions we're going to take in response to what people are sharing with us, if they're sharing with us. And a lot of times for executive leaders, you're not going to be, people below you are not necessarily going to tell you when they think that you are kind of teetering on the edge a bit. And so I think that you need to make sure in advance that you have support systems in place, and that you have activities, things that you enjoy doing that you're going to do. And it's also, I think sometimes we get into this place where we feel like self-care is selfish, but it's not. It's essential to making leadership sustainable.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you answered a question I was going to ask. You just answered what's something or a few things that leaders can do to protect themselves to lead well over the long term. And I think we're shifting nicely into kind of the reflection and takeaway mode here. So let's just conclude with an important question. And that is, if you had to give leaders one mindset shift when it comes to leading through the emotional weight, what would that be?
I think it's that the work is hard, standards still matter, and you're not the sole bearer of emotional weight for your agency. So I think kind of having those three things, you want to create conditions of support in these environments, not emotional dependence. And it's the same kinds of things that we do for our clients. We don't want them to become emotionally dependent on us. And so as leaders, you don't want to make your team members become emotionally dependent on you. And so I think when you shift from they may need me to carry this burden to they need me to support them while they're carrying the burden, that changes things. And so I think you listen differently, you communicate more openly when you're working from that perspective. You're able to set clearer boundaries, and you are modeling an emotional regulation and self-care that you want your team to practice. So those are the things that I think could help leaders as they're kind of trying to figure out how to negotiate this type of environment.
Ronnetta, this has been an incredibly meaningful conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspective, your experience, and your wisdom with us. For those listening, if this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to reflect on how you're leading your team and how you're caring for yourself in the process. Would encourage you to like and subscribe and share this with colleagues. And don't also forget to look into our other two podcasts, Mastering Fundraising and The Nonprofit Edge. And thank you again for joining us on Lead for Good. We encourage all of you out there who are leaders or aspiring leaders to remember that it is important to always lead for good. Thanks all.
Thank you for joining us for this most recent episode of Lead for Good. Our passion is helping nonprofit leaders reach their full potential as leaders, and we sincerely hope this episode has been edifying for you. Please subscribe to this podcast to not miss any of our Lead for Good conversations. We welcome your feedback, suggestions, and comments via email at hello@fulcrumleader.com. Lead for Good is a production of Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership. Please visit us on the web at www.fulcrumleader.com. Until next time, we wish you all the best and encourage you to always lead for good.